And as you all know, one of the policies of the Roman Curia members, to the nature of maintaining their power in the conquest of the unum sanctum conquest issues, is to approach everything from the perspective of not allowing moral or ethical principles interfere with their pre-prescribed operations. And so I'm going to read. I first want to read a state to you, as we were saying earlier, so that you can keep in mind that our many of our people's concepts about estate is absolutely incorrect. And so I'll give it to you in short. And so keep in mind the ancient and modern jurisprudence that you will find in Bouvier's dictionaries, uh, Henry Campbell Black's dictionaries, etc., are rooted in ancient and modern jurisprudence. So when many people think that many of these established principles are contemporary, the concept would be wrong. And then you must also remember that the jurisprudence principles actually come from the ancient Sabian Moors via many of the Berber Gypsy tribes coming up and out of Africa on both sides of the water, etc. And so these principles are ancient. And so to remind you, because many of our people, because of the Freudian animal husbandry training, have been fooled into thinking that many of the primal positive law jurisprudence principles have their origin with hybrid Europeans, which is absolutely not true. This is again why it is important, as we reminded you over the years, when you're looking at European history, you got to remember we lost Europe in mid, the early to the mid 1800s, and a lot of the historical context that we have adopted in the name of education is actually that animal husbandry training in order to write us out of history and to write the hybrid European into history. And this is where you get even the tradition of the hybrid European referencing the Aboriginal peoples, impoverished communities here as ghetto, which actually comes from the Ibri, which is falsely referred to as Hebrew, Yetta, which was the wealthy areas in Iberia, which is now known as Europe, which is the control or under the estate of the Moors, who have been genocided out. And of course, many of you who know, and many of you who are scholars, can go into a lot of available history and documents a history like Jose Pimente Bay. You can go into Jolie Rogers, George Massey. Um, what's the Hybrid Brothers book, Ancient and Modern Britons 1 and 2, and of course you already know that the Danes and the Dubs and the Moors and the Picts are all Moors, and this is why when you do any really just basic research into Iberian history, and of course this has much to do as to why when they speak of Europe, they rarely will tie Iberia with it, because they don't want you to think or retie yourself to Moorish history, because that's a deliberate separation, because you're talking about jurisdictional powers and also the true Europeans. Was there a question, Dr.
No,
Knight?
I just wanted to add something to what you just said. When you talked about the ancient Brits and
Ancient and modern
Brits versus the modern Brits, and how you said genocided out. But one of the things they did, they bred out a lot of the the melanation
and
and
this is where you're talking about the hybrids,
right,
yes.
but there was a lot of breeding with with them, and eventually, you know how you bleach out whatever was there. But what I wanted to say as a correlation is that what we're seeing today with all of the push for the crossbreeding, so to speak, with with the melanated man. With well, so you've seen the melanated man, but the melanated woman, melanated woman with the hybrid European. You're seeing it more and more, like they're doing what they did in Australia, deliberately figured out how many generations it would take to bleach out. The Aboriginal.
With the problem that and that's absolutely true. With the problem that they're having is that the Canaanite Moabite gene is so strong that it always dominates. And this is another reason why they've been very adamant on altering and modifying the DNA, which many people need to understand. This is why they have really invented what they call the jab, and also put in it, among other things, fetal tissue, in order to imply that the people are cannibalizing, etc. Also, it changes your DNA, and also for many people, and which we talked about, many of you have experienced, that there's graphene oxide. However, the issue of the estate and the deliberate genocide, is always expressed among all of the politicians, the so-called lawyers, esquires, etc. And I want you all to remember this. Is this level enough to be read?
Yes, you can bring it down just a little bit, just right there.
All right, you all read this carefully.
Bring it up a little bit.
And write this down.
There you go.
Read this, and this is the Silent Weapons Executive Order 11490. This was done during the Johnson administration. This is right after they assassinated Kennedy. Keep that in mind. Now, this is their policy, and this is for many of the people who keep forgetting that we're under occupation, and also many people who, rather than try to heal the nation, they're getting this scenario of creating a new nation, which cannot be done. The nation must be healed, etc. And I think because of the heavy and tedious work that's involved in the reality of what we're actually dealing with, that many people lack the courage and the perseverance to continue the struggle, because many of them have been spiritually and politically and economically broken. And of course, that's part of the agenda of the Unum Sanctum operations, etc. So for you to keep in mind and not forget, when you're talking to members of the Bar Association, this is what they are reading secretly, along with the politicians and the council people and the mayors and the pseudo governors and the alleged senators and congressmen for the United States Corporation Company, all of who have different positions of what you call administrative clerk powers, etc., assigned for the enforcement of the Unum Sanctum operations. This is their security page that is shared among all politicians, all lawyers, all esquires, all attorneys, but never made public, which is also why our people who don't understand the real operations often get frustrated when they're dealing with these so-called U.S. agencies and keep failing to get, quote unquote, justice. And then you'll see many of our people making statements over the years, no justice, no peace, and things like that, making posters and T-shirts with those statements on it, and they are thinking that they're appealing to these people's morals and ethical side, not comprehending the real politics. So this is their position. Is this clear? And many of you are looking, take a snapshot so that you can pull this up later on your phones or your computers.
There. No.
And then I'll read it. Security. And I'll read the instructions that is given to all the politicians that you have been trusting and voting for. And it says Operations Research Technical Manual, TM-SW7905.1. You can start on page 3 or on page 57. And in one of our recent treatises here, we did go into 57. We're going to go into page 3, security. And keep in mind, all politicians, all lawyers, all attorneys, all bar members, all congressmen, all senators, all governors have this as their political operations. When they're doing any legislation, presenting any bills, this is their ultimate end, irregardless of what appears to you. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e., the engineering of social automation systems, quote unquote, silent weapons, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e., slavery and genocide. This manual is in itself an analog declaration of intent. Such a writing must be secured from public scrutiny. Otherwise, it might be recognized as a technically formal declaration of domestic war. Furthermore, whenever any person or group of persons in a position of great power and without the full knowledge and consent of the public uses such knowledge and methodology for economic conquest, it must be understood that a state of domestic warfare exists between said person or groups of persons and the public. The solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no apologizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. You have qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity and yet analyze and discuss your observations and conclusions with others of similar intellectual capacity without a loss of discretion or humility. Such virtues are exercised in your own best interest. Do not deviate from them. Welcome aboard, page 4. This publication marks the 25th anniversary of the Third World War, called the Quiet War, quote unquote, being conducted using subjective biological warfare fought with silent weapons, quote unquote. This book contains an introductory description of this war, its strategies, and its weaponry. May 1979, 74-1120. This is their security page, and this is why this is not talked about in public. This is essentially, as it has been for them, what is known as a top secret document. And of course, people get frustrated. Like as you see, you'll have people among our own that over the years will have meetings and they will talk about the packing of the POW camps or prison systems with our people predominantly, and talk about the unfairness of it, and immediately get misdirected into what we call the the fake race paradigm argument and prejudice argument, which was designed to divert the people from the fact that these people that you've been calling government are actually waging war on the people, and their positions have no place for moral or ethical or cultural considerations. However, from a political perspective, one of their main objectives for political operations is a strategy of continuously doing what is known as colored or colorable legislation and legacy operations to convince the people that they're doing something on behalf or for the good of the people under the jurisdiction of the de facto United States government and its subdivisional agencies, all of which, including the legislation, are actually run by Roman Curia members, 99% of whom are members of the British Accredited Registry in violation of both treaties and constitutions. And as many of you know, and particularly many of you who are scholars, etc., are very well aware of the original article of Amendment 13, often referred to as the 1320, and also with the nobility section, whereas members of the British Accredited Registry were disallowed to hold any office under the jurisdiction of the Republic Order of the States United, commonly referred to as United States, etc. And so all of those things have been breached long time ago, and this is where we have to remind you all every once in a while to keep in mind the British Act or the England Act of England 1871, which you know in your congressional records and in the House journals as the Organic Act of Congress 1871. And with those who have been telling the people, particularly of late, which we've been telling people for years, because they're being forced to admit it, that the United States is a private foreign trafficking corporation. And the problem that you have with the instrumentalities, the bottomry instruments that they have been perpetrating against the world in order to create what they would call a reserve currency operations on fungible bond systems issued for mainly from 55 Water Street, etc., are at the heart of their U.S. Treasury bond system that has been the foundation of creating what they know or what you've been hearing as the U.S. reserve currency operations, which is in dire straits right now, because as we have told you in the last 7 or so years, we've reminded you that that there will become a feedback loop, which you're seeing right now, where the rest of the world, due to the fact of the criminality, and it has damaged so many nation states, that that they have decided to come together to counter Rome's army, etc., and resist certain trade operations with the U.S. corporation in order to bankrupt some areas of it, which are all controlled actually from the Vatican. So when you're talking about any corporate entity or operations operating in what is known as the Western Hemisphere, which does not necessarily mean what you'll call geographical territory, but is loosely used to refer to, as an example, England, United States, Canada, Australia, etc. All of these are referenced as Western, the Western world. But what that implies is we're actually Occidental breed or the hybrid breed of Europeans who have been operating the European hegemony operations for these last couple of centuries, which has been come to be known with this cover title referred to as white supremacy, which is a cover for European hegemony operations. And this is again why it's also important for you to not forget that one of the continued operations of the Inquisition execution has always been, and write this down so you don't forget it, to do all of their injuries to other people, doing it in someone else's name, and doing it in someone else's identity. So one of the problems that we have is our people not only having a limited knowledge about and who they themselves are, they also have a limited knowledge of these other people who have been impostoring as themselves and also as government, etc. However, these are social, political, economic realities that, though uncomfortable for many people, must be taken in consideration so that we can be better equipped mentally and spiritually to come together harmonically and to begin to shed the grip, the iron hand grip of Rome on the Canaanite, Moabite peoples, etc., commonly known as Kemites, Hamathites, etc., in order to fix our house. And the other thing that you are to take into consideration, that many people who know this real history um, will deliberately divert from it under the idea that we can do these little clubs and create new nations, etc., when the fact of the matter is you can't. You must fix the nation already exists. Or you have the problem where so many of our people want to be the chief. And so this is where you see a lot of the operative schisms all across the land, where people take on executive titles, etc., of the ancient world, which in their reality, those titles belong to us. However, the political reality is that until the people are conscious to a certain level, they themselves will not shed Rome, even though they have been traditionally, by customs, told in many formats, whether in Hebrew operations, what you call Hebrew operations, or under so-called Coptic Christian operations, and then Orthodox Christian operations, and then Protestant Christian operations, and then Muslim operations, all saying that to render under Caesar what is Caesar's, and that has become an established and common presentment from a moral political perspective in the civil world for almost all the peoples on the planet, even people who are not necessarily what you would refer to as religious oriented people. These are fundamental principles. However, that has become a common statement, but it is often not examined by the people because they're not aware that the people who have been governing us are essentially Roman Curia members. And then we seek a remedy of the problems that they are creating. We go to them and into their de facto jurisdictions seeking remedy. And this is where, over the years, you have always seen we take the position of notifying them or making claim of right and not appealing to them or applying to them, knowing, because this is the fact, that they will dance you around in circles for years and frustrate you and economically drain your resources and then still not give you remedy, because they're operating from the perspective that most of our people don't know that they are de facto and that they're imposters, and they're not the real Saba people, that they are imposters, absolutely. And this is why once in a while when we talk about Septuaginta and the Bible will refer to people John 8:44. And if you don't forget that, you'll know what we're saying. Because you also know that as soon as you start telling the truth, they start sanctioning people because they don't want the people to come out of the false narrative control systems, of the mind control systems that they've adopted under the animal husbandry training, under the guise of education, adopted from the studies of Sigmund Freud, which are adopted into all of your school systems under the Western Hemisphere. And of course, many of our natural peoples of the land attempt to use the adopted education systems of Freud in order to solve problems, and then we keep going or walking back into the hole of false jurisdictions, and then we continuously are experiencing men and women who will arise and want to create a new nation rather than heal the nation that's here, as if they're going to create another territorial jurisdiction of aggregate land and then be left at peace to execute the rightful, moral, ethical operations of ancient Canaan African people, i.e., sometimes referred to under the cover of the true Jew, etc., of these people of the Western Hemisphere who have been trained under animal husbandry that human beings are crayons, like green people and purple people and light skinned, orange skinned black people, and it doesn't matter what color you are. When you hear that kind of language, you already know that you're dealing with the mind control systems that was adopted under the mentalism operations of human subjugation, coming from the studies of the brain, etc., and human responses under Sigmund Freud, which is where they get the animal husbandry methodologies adopted into the educational systems, particularly of the General Education Board, which we reminded you all continuously over the years to read the philosophy page of the General Education Board 1902. And as you know, and this stuff is redundant, but I think again, and it becomes obvious that because we get so tied up with the miseries and the injuries that are being hoisted upon us, that a lot of times we keep looking for something new when the truth doesn't come in versions. It is what it is. And you need to understand and have a comprehension and an understanding and an overstanding of what the injury is that has happened to us, what got us to where we are today, in order to unravel the yarn of evil that has permeated on the planet, and also have an insight into the operations that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, that many of the people that they've trusted that have been calling themselves government agencies, politicians, preachers, rabbis, imams, preachers, etc., from all of the branches of all your so-called major religions, many of them are in actuality by choice devil worshippers and Satanists, and they choose the dark side of doing things, but they gain the people's trust by always hiding behind phrases like Jesus, Muhammad, etc., Confucius, etc. And yet they have been so successful because the people have not suspected that the Satanists were actually dominating all the major world's religions. And this is, again, why when many people begin to do some study, they start condemning religion, not comprehending the fact that the masses haven't been getting religion anyway. They've been getting dogmata. And so religion has been charged with evil with many people when it's not the religion, it's actually those who have taken over and corrupted religion, etc. And this has again to do with even the ancient Babylonian symbolisms, etc., that many of them use and put a negative spin on, when actually most of them are actually positive and in harmony with nature. But yet, when our people see many of the symbols, they're given a demonic or negative connotation, and our people shy away from them. Or if they go into it, they are guided by the dark priesthood, going into the negative energy in their operations. Not unlike when they do sacrificing of little people, that they even use it in the situations that they're putting in people's arms, etc. That's part of their Satanist rituals, etc., to contaminate people. So I'm going to go also in, as we talked about earlier, into estate, so that you can keep in mind what most of you already know. But again, this is a reminder. Much of this information are for people who are awakening to the corruption, because the injuries that are being hoisted upon humanity are more and more open and more blatant. And so many of the people their ears are more open now because they're receiving extreme pain on many levels. they're losing their children to these Satanist sacrificers, etc. And it's confusing many people because they thought these people were government, i.e., their protectors who they're paying taxes to, etc. And they're finding out, although they're reluctant to accept it, that these people are really exploiting feeders, and they are vampiric in their character, both politically and in their nature of operations with other humans.
Can you
It's unfortunate, but it's true.
can you take questions before they roll away, and especially if
Yes.
they're in line with? Here, this is a question
Go ahead.
because you're talking about nations and so forth for healing the nation. Um, I'm just going to put it Islam. Dr. G, can Taj talk on Empress Ninti of North Carolina on charter also being the true monarch?
See, this is what I'm presenting to you. I try to avoid getting in personal because there's many people that are claiming their right of emperorship and right of um, sultan and emperor. You got about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different people around the land who claim to be emperor. You got the same thing with different brothers and sisters, and it doesn't mean that they don't have right of estate. But this is one of the things that I'm presenting, even with this request for healing, is that we should be more concerned with the work that needs to be done, and that the titles, for the most part, are not so much important. It is the work that needs to be done. As an example, and this is not, an issue of ego. Myself, I have actually about 3 absolute titles that I could use or that I would use based on actual structured operations over the years, but I don't use them because I don't take the position that a broken nation, we should act like we're in sovereign control when we're actually not. And the issue is that we need to fix our people because the sovereignty is divine, is not politically given, and is not decided because you, me, or anyone else decides in recognition of the corruption of the history that all of a sudden we are the emperor or the empress or the sultan, etc., or the emir of a territory. And it doesn't mean that some of these titles are not used lawfully and rightfully in what you would call your territorial jurisdictions under your provinces, organized by the people, which you have the right to do. Absolutely. However, my concern is that it's more important not so much for the titles to be held by people, but that the people who have this knowledge should be more concerned with healing the people in the nation, because you cannot take a people of a broken nation and actually constructively build or maintain or sustain those things necessary for national institutional operations. And this is one of the reasons why over the years and over the generations, you will see many men and women approach the healing of the nation by being more concerned with taking on titles as if the power is in the title, when in fact the power actually is in the people. And if you don't fix the people, those positions, they are never successful. And I think a lot of times people get caught up, and I'm not condemning, I'm just being honest about this, in the imagery that's portrayed. And as a matter of fact, over the years, in particularly in the most recent years, many of you who know me over the years have seen in these most recent years, I've had less tendency to wear my fezzes and or my kufis. And many people have questioned that. And the real deal is I'm in the field, down in the dirt with the people. And I think as for me, it's not for everyone else. None of the garb makes you. Your bloodline and your pedigree makes you. The work makes you. And I think a lot of times when people see you in your Moorish costumes with your pantaloons, because I've also had many of you who've known me over years, custom costumes and pantaloons, etc., and boleros, Moorish, that were very, very, very expensive and very well made, etc. But people have a tendency to be distracted by them and also get into this psychology of trying to lift people up or make you this image of royalty, etc. And I'm offended by that because to me, the royalty are the people themselves, and particularly those who are less conscious of their pedigree and bloodline. And I think anybody that's a soldier in the war for restoring the nation should be more concerned in fixing the house than projecting an image. It doesn't mean that you hold information back, but it's sort of like someone egotistically sitting on the throne, and then you have a bunch of corrupted people that you're calling the nationals or the citizenry, and half of them are still corrupted because their minds have not been cleaned, and they have not done their shadow work because they don't know the real history. And then you have many of them that still keep thinking that these hybrid Europeans who are claiming to be Americans are actually the sovereigns and have the only right to claim to be sovereigns of the land under the title of white people, which is a status, and also sovereign of the land. And they have a tendency to walk back and forth into political jurisdictions that they don't belong in, and they think that the political jurisdictions are distance, when jurisdiction and foreign does not mean distance. And so you have a constant confusion that arises among the people because you have people moving more in many times in many areas on emotion and not on the knowledge of who they are, and by the spirit of that knowledge therefore beginning to heal, and then having more capacity to heal others around them. And then we come together as a collective whole by nature, not by some artificial means. Because when people have a knowledge of who they really are and how they got to where they are, you don't need to convince them anymore. Their level of knowledge is no longer predicated in what they believe. It becomes what they know. And a man and a woman who knows themselves is less apt to be enslaved or suppressed than one who just believes or adopts something because they want to be a part of a club or part of an organization in the guise of being a nation, when the nation is out there and it's all of the people of Canaanite, Moabite descent, etc., who have been branded by these tags: Negro, Black, Colored, Indian, etc., and many of whom are not even aware of why we were called Indians or the history of that, etc. While those designations have been applied to the ancient Canaanite Moabites, that is really not the pedigree names of the people, etc. And these subtleties that actually have a great impact on the legal and lawful status of the people is often not taken in consideration or addressed because they don't want to lose the attention of the people, and they want to keep them in this so-called follower mentality, paying tithing and dues, etc. And on the long run, there's nothing fixed because the components of the nation are not fixed. So not unlike if you have a storm come along and do damage to your house, you must fix what's broken. You don't necessarily tear your house up and then dig all the land up and throw the land somewhere, because you're not going to remake the plots of land that is your inherited estate. You may rebuild on it, or you may repair that which is on it. Likewise with the component parts of the children or the offspring of the matriarchy, etc., which are commonly called in their process of coming into being nativity, nasi, which means to come to life or to come into being, from which you derive the term commonly used at Midgard, referred to as nations and nationality. And this is why it's important for people to also have a more correct meaning of the social political term nationality and nationhood, etc. So when they're talking about nationhood, absent of the pedigree, etc., it creates a false paradigm of hopes, etc., that cannot be sustained unless the people are actually spiritually connected to it. And if the people keep thinking that the hybrid Europeans who have conquered the Western Hemisphere are the Americans, You're not going to do anything with them. What they will be easily subjected to COINTELPRO operation is most of these people who end up be the traitors among us and the operatives of misprision, particularly those who have been heavily influenced by the Freudian mind control systems, etc., known as the General Education Board. They promoted amongst their own children, and particularly, again, those who are members of the Bar Association and those who have been working with them are the major ones who become the infiltrators because they have a level of intelligence already and the people trust them. But usually, most of their activity will be for selfish gain economically with no real cures for the people, and they send the people in circles. And this is according to the general rules of procedures, the civil rules of procedure set up by the circle members, the members of the Circle Church and Chancery, which is guided by those persons, which is why when our people go to the de facto court systems, which are fraudulent jurisdictions, etc., and are in fact not courts at all, that there's no remedy. And of course, these are what you call passageways or portals to their POW camps, i.e., the penal systems for genociding our people and destroying our families. And then, of course, these people who are members or associate members with them secretly, sometimes referred to as boule, among the boule and others, are actually assigned among our people to actually distract us by virtue of saying that they're helping the people or they're teaching law, etc. But you'll see that they'll always make it complex so that you can start paying them off and you're still paying Rome. And the ultimate operations or the outcome is that they're still packing the prisons with our people, still trespassing against our people. And then the operatives among our own are extracting thousands of energy notes from our people in the name of bringing them remedy, which they never do. So this is, again, why it's important for you to have a knowledge or have an idea why I've always taken the position that we have to heal the existing nation. You can't make a broken brick, you understand, be strong in a building unless you're using good mortar to make your repairs. And the mortar for humans are in the political realm is nationality.
Thank you. We have another question I think goes right with that because while you're on the subject, this question from Jerome Kane says, did Emperor Khufu show Taj documents of full faith and credit, and will he accept the seat that was offered? And I believe he's talking about your recent appearance on Revision Radio.
This has always been my position. I'm making myself very clear. As for myself, this is not for others because for me, and I think Dr. Nyla knows me over the years, I've never been one who's eager to take what you call titles or positions of what you would call, some people call the leader guys. I don't reject that. I think that's the spirit of others. I'm a good fisherman. I will go out and get the people. And for all these people that need these positions and powers, etc., to satisfy whatever spirit of ego they have, you can have the throne. I'm out here doing the work. That's my position. I don't need titles. But I do support anyone that's helping to heal the nation. I'm making that very clear. And keep in mind, faith and credit is a commercial system that's operating for the most part or at Midgard under the commercial operations of the Uniform Commercial Codes. I'm more harmonic with getting back to nature and the true history of the ancient Kemites, Moabites, etc., which is the gold and silver in harmony with the sun, the moon, and the stars, etc., which is the actual monetary system, and the right of heirship to the land, which is the power and the source of the resources. I'm more interested in an approach from that perspective because credit is debt. I'm not interested in indebting our people. I'm interested in restoring their estate because our people should not be in debt to any foreigner. But I understand that how the credit systems operate. I do understand and comprehend that. However, I don't necessarily promote that. I'm going for the whale. I don't want the whiting fish. Though I like whiting fish. I'm for a restoration of the estate so that these issues, my position is this: why put our people in a position to be credited to a foreigner who's been robbing them, who's never honorable, and has no intention of being honorable, on material estates that belongs to them in the first place? And then we're going to have them process or have someone acknowledge full faith and credit, which is a debt system. I don't say that it's not to be used. It's fine in what you call an honorable system. But I just read to you, King Alfred, that's their policy. And this is the reason why, like when you see over the years, all of the Asiatic people, whether you're dealing with many of the different tribes of Moors here in the Western Hemisphere, everybody that has made any agreement with them, whether they're building casinos or taking some reservation or taking some other separate piece of implied sovereign operations, they've all been betrayed. And the credit system was actually used to put them in debt on their own land. Without being honest about these dynamics is to be, to me, spiritually corrupt. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't address some of these things in our processes of rising, but I'm very clear to put everything in its place.
Okay, so we have another comment question. We'll bring it. Dr. G, please ask Taj to address the Supreme Grand Council issue that people are saying, falsely, I believe, that he is ignoring.
I'm not ignoring anything among our people. I've been doing this for about 40
Supreme
years.
Grand Council issue. I don't know.
Because the Supreme Grand Council is actually rightfully with Moors coming together, which they should do logically, and all activities basically should be transparent and to the public, with manuals available to the public relative to diversity of their positions under consular principle that are established in fatwa, in Muslim law, etc., that are adopted in constitutional principles and treaty operations called consular venues. And what you find is that people, the common people, to whose birthright that we're all addressing, aren't even aware of it because they're not teaching them. The people are more interested in positions and titles and controlling people. And I'm saying people that need that, have fun. It's not what I do. Like I understand fundamental building constructions. You give me time and materials, put me on a piece of land, and I'll build a castle without anyone else's help. All I would need is material, whether it's the electric, whether it's the masonry, whether it's the plumbing, whether it's the furniture, whether it's the roof, whether it's the tile, whether it's the custom shelves, whether it's custom furniture, whether it's sewing, etc. I can do it all, and that's a fact.
And that I can attest to.
So I look at the reality of our relationship with nature, and I measure things by that. I don't measure by people's egos or positions because 90% of the time, let's look at this reality. 90% of the people in almost every position of so-called leadership has more or less, in some ways, a cadre of people around them that admire them or serve them, but the greater broad spectrum of the people of the land, of whose birthright everybody's speaking of, have neither a connection to them and are not aware of them because most of them are secretive with what they do among themselves and use it as a point of power to impress people, and are actually doing very little to none for the community at large. Now, this is not to say that that's not their intention. I'm saying if there's something relative to the right of the people, it is public and it's transparent, and it is available to be known, even if it's not known. It's not something that we need to always have in some private conversation where we're empowering each other to so-called rule the affairs of our people when they don't know the rules of the game. I'm more interested in fishing the people and making them aware of the rules of the game. If they choose to start taking their places among the affairs of men, which we should do and should be about, and logically we have to set up or restore, because not so much setting up, restore councils among our people, etc., which are the nature of our customs and traditions. I'm all for that. However, and it's not a reluctance or it's not a condemnation. I want to see more of the people that know the real history to produce literature and make it well, readily available to all of the people. Whether they accept it or not is not my argument. Made available to them. That whosoever will, let them hear. Whosoever will, let them come. And for those who come with knowledge and with comprehension of what they're dealing with, you can take those people and repair the nation. That has always been my position.
As a comment, share from Monica Love. We cannot do work, Grand Sheik, without house cleaning.
That's exactly.
We must tighten our circle and out publicly out the agents that mislead.
You got that absolutely right. 100%, and that's part of the healing, isn't it? And I'm so glad you made that statement, because it's so true. And if you look at the history, particularly the contemporary history of many people trying to repair us, and one figure in particularly, our illustrious Prophet Noble Drew Ali, and the foundation that he set for the restoration of our state. And he has had opposition on so many fronts with people around him. However, the principles laid down by him for us and the restoration of our state and our land and our nation, etc., have proven to be absolutely correct and true. And he always reminded us, so that we don't get stagnated. He would say that the half has not been told. If I told you everything, you would go back to sleep. He says, study yourselves. And when you had studied well and would ask me what to study next, I would reply, study yourselves. And of course, when you actually do that, you start making discernment. And when people start participating in national reparation willingly, on knowledge and not on emotion, not on clubism, not on doing what you call a salami baloney adoration of leader guys sitting on some throne, etc. Not that I'm condemning that, etc. Guess what? You're not going to have anything. You're going to have what we've been having. All these generations passing with these principles having already been laid down and not carried out. And people pretending they got to reinvent the wheel rather than fixing or repairing the house. And I'm telling you, that's the major problem. Be honest about us all. Most of the people that have come and gone have been more preoccupied with their egos and with their images and with raising finance at the expense of the poor, and have done some good, but in fact have done limited reality of really restoring fundamental civic knowledge. And you hear people left and right talking about nation this, nation that, nation of this, nation of that, and then don't teach nationality, which is an absolute contradiction, because it's a lot of work, and it indeed is, because we have an injured people. Yes, we do. But you must be real about that. And so my principle is, I'm not unlike a carpenter I'm repairing a door right now. Those principles of carpentry apply all over the world. It's not going to be fixed with belief or emotion. It's going to be fixed with knowledge and dedication to the principles and the knowledge of the materials that are used and that are necessary to make such repairs. Doesn't operate on, oh, we need sandwiches. Well, good. If you can't cook, there's tough cookies. Get somebody who can. And all I'm saying is, I'm a fisherman. I'll catch the fish. You all do the cooking. I ain't arguing it. I don't need the titles.
Here we go. Yalla and Ra Whirlwind says the Moorish movement is not a social club. It is to be taken seriously, because being undesirable is not acceptable.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Absolutely. And again, when you start studying during the contemporary history of the people working to restore and to fix some of the injury among our people, that psychology has been allowed to take root without challenge. And so we find ourselves going in circles in many areas because people have adopted the idea that it's a religious belief and not the restoration of a lost estate. And so the way they approach it has been flawed. And then very often people have been taking a position of either or rather than looking that it involves all of it.
So BIHM the third asks, how do you fix the people?
Number one, knowledge would be the first thing I would say. And a research, and I always, as you all know, over the years would give people reference points whenever I present something, or some people like to call it receipts, so that the information becomes their own. Because when people keep or people are given a philosophy or position by different people who are going against the grain and exposing certain information that's otherwise suppressed, they have a tendency to look at that being as the source. When the real deal, when it's looked at that way, they don't recognize that it's actually their birthright information. And this is where you get so many of our people getting caught up in the imagery of people having titles rather than looking at how much of the actual work that is necessary to be put in place to restore those titles by necessity of service to the people is how we should be looking at this. Excuse me.
There's a question for you to define estate.
Estate. Now, this is essentially, and keep this in mind while I'm going to go into estate and status. I want you all to write down land, as we've talked about before, and do the research on your own so that you can relate to this. So now, when you're talking about nation, people, restoring our nation. So when you're talking nation, you're talking about the living divine beings manifest in human flesh. And with that natural being, you would refer to in personam jurisdiction. When you're talking about the subject matter of any operations of structure of institutions that are put in place to structural formulate, to maintain, sustain, and support the structure of nation, now you're talking about subject matter jurisdiction. And when you're talking about the restored land or the aggregate land or motherland, etc., that people fly their vixillum on, and vixillum is known as your flag, etc., sometimes referred to as flying your colors, etc., that's territorial jurisdiction. All of those things must be in place, and all of those things must be taken into consideration, and an honorable approach of the people of recognizing their estate and their bloodline to have a spiritual connection to it, because people won't defend that which they don't feel is theirs, etc. And these things have been removed from our people. So let's talk about estate. Estate is the interest which anyone has in lands or in any other subject of property. So it is essentially an estate is in lands, tenements, and hereditaments. Write down hereditaments. Signifies such interest as the tenant has therein. It is the condition or the circumstances in which the owner stands with regard to his or her property. In this sense, quote unquote, estate is constantly used in conveyances in connection with the words, quote unquote, right and rights, quote unquote, title, quote unquote interests. Keep all this in mind. And is in a general or great degree synonymous with all of them. So estate relates to rights, titles, interests, etc., land, hereditaments, tenements, etc. And so now you're talking about making the distinction, which our people need to be aware of what is known as allodial right of claim, or what is known as aboriginal title, which would be distinguished from mortgages and deeds. There are two different areas. Are we clear? So that's important. And so the degree or the decree of quality, the nature, and the extent of interest which a person has in real property, and comprehend that real property is not what you call real estate. There are two different categories. So in real property is usually referred in to us and as an estate. So when you're making reference to an estate, you're talking about all inheritances. You're talking about all hereditaments, which would include the corporal as well as the incorporeal. Therefore, you're dealing with your traditions and customs that supersede Roman law, that supersede legislated law, but harmonize what is known universally as quote unquote the common law. So the common law comes from the customs and traditions of established right of inheritance and hereditaments, which are related to your estate, and often referred to in Asiatic, African, Berber culture and history as the house of. As an example, if you say, like if I'm referring to the estate of Dr. Naila, in African culture, we would call it the house of Naila. And so when you hear that term or that phrase, the house of, you're talking about the estate of. It encompasses so broad an area that the everyday being is not informed of. This is why you see me take so much these positions over the years that I take, because I know these things must be fixed with our people if you're going to repair them or help repair them. Because remember, they themselves must be willing. Because if the will and intent is not there, you're not doing anything but bringing dirt back into your house that needs to be repaired. And so even like you see when Noble Drew set up the old Canaanite temple, he said, with these lessons, you can get your house in order. So to get your house in order is to get your nation in order. You look at the constructive carpentry and building principles are actually the same. You're just dealing with what is called the corporal and the incorporeal. And thus you would call it the aggregate and the abstract, or the concrete and the spiritual, or the physical and spiritual. Those principles are synonymous in linguistic form to demonstrate both the aggregate or the physical realm of civil operations, as well as the principled law or positive law and legacy operations that support, i.e., the moral, or what you call moral, ethical, spiritual maintenance of that. And that's where morals and ethics come in. And also usually presented under what you would call religious or operations or philosophical operations. And this is where you have the divine and national movement. It is taking in consideration the natural operations of the divine sovereign